I'm going to start by saying thank you. Because for those of us who are privileged enough to have food and shelter, what's really got us through the last 6 months has been the stories. Thank you for all the great content. It's genuinely been a lifesaver. Also, congratulations on your promotion to co-CEO of Netflix. It's wonderful to see a cinephile become king of the world.
Very kind of you to say. And you are correct. We have been, some of us have been quite fortunate over such a terrible time. But we've been able to reconnect with our families in some ways and to enjoy stories at a level that we probably wouldn't have had time for, taken time for in the past. So it's a very interesting time in the world.
It's also a great time to be in the streaming business. I read that Netflix added 26 million subscribers over the last 6 months. Clearly, we're all consuming content voraciously because we all do have more time. But the entertainment business has been ravaged by the pandemic. What is your biggest concern right now?
Look, the biggest thing that we've been focused on is our return to production so that those stories that have become so vital to everybody can continue to flow. Getting back to some form of normalization of life is very important for everybody, including everyone who works in this industry. There's the other pieces, which are, getting back out to go to the movie theater. It's a very important social function that people have, and I'm quite confident that it will return. Because I think it feeds a part of the human existence that is so vital and important to all of us. But for me personally, we don't have, well, that's not that big of a part of our business, but production of our shows and films around the world is. And we've been quite fun getting back to production to make sure we don't have an interruption in those stories. And it's been particularly challenging in India. But we're also seeing very encouraging signs. We have more than 10 of our productions, films, series, unscripted shows that will be back in full production in November. So we're quite at that.
You're saying, Ted, that you do see a time when theaters will be back. But for the last week, I think I've seen at least half a dozen stories that talk about how Hollywood's Tenet experiment has failed and the immediate future of theaters is catastrophic. How are you reading all of this?
It's very hard, even in stable times, to predict massive changes in consumer behavior. And these are not stable times. So we want to be careful not to overread a situation where, in the case of Tenet, the theaters in major cities in the United States are not open. And the ones that are open have very limited seating. It's not a great experience today. I'm sure it will be down the road. And I do see, and the international box office numbers for Tenet were quite satisfying. So I do think that you can look at the two stories and decide which one you think is the predictor of the future, and probably it's somewhere in between.
Let's talk about India. So in the last few months, Netflix has had great success with Indian-themed programming like Indian Matchmaking and Never Have I Ever. You now have an Indian-American, Bela Bajaria, as head of global television. Can we read the tea leaves and say that India is going to be even more important for the platform?
It's hard to say how it could be more important. We've said from the beginning that India was a critical market in the world for us and for most industry, but particularly, I think, in entertainment business. I mean, the Indian market is such lovers of great storytelling, great cinema, and increasingly great television. And so we're very heavily invested, as you know, in growing our original stories from India. But really important that we're growing it not just for India. We're growing those stories to be for our global platform, so that people around the world are enjoying these stories that did not traditionally travel very well, except for in key markets. Where we're seeing very mainstream watching of content from India all over the world.
Ted, can you share a little bit about that? I'm very curious about, where are Indian stories traveling to? What are numbers in other countries that surprise you for Indian content?
Well, they're traveling everywhere. I mean, there's on one example, you mentioned there's a kind of Americanized version of it in Never Have I Ever. But that's, it's quite a story that people hold very close to them because it's very, it reflects their lives in many ways, or some connection in their family. But also our Indian series and films, even starting back at the beginning with Sacred Games, played in every major market throughout Europe and Latin America. And the reciprocal is true as well. In India, what we're seeing is very large scale watching of content from Spain, from Korea, from Japan. Our Indian members will recognize seeing those titles in the top 10 routinely. And on the animation side, Mighty Little Bean is now the most watched non-English animated series in the U.S. And in fact, we have a brand new season of Mighty Little Bean coming on Friday.
It's amazing to see these stories travel, and it really is a superpower for Netflix to be able to do that, to take great stories from anywhere and just play them anywhere. But does that also come with a sort of responsibility in terms of the messaging you're putting out there? Because now you are shaping taste, you're shaping sensibilities, you're introducing cultures to each other. So are you mindful of what you're putting out there, especially because the world is becoming so polarized?
Well, definitely. And the main thing for us is, we have a large local focus. So to make sure that this is not some vision of India that I try to bring to the table or that somebody from the U.S. brings to the table. These stories are created by Indian creators who are telling the stories that they grew up with or the stories that their life experiences bring to the table. And then we're really mindful to be to give them the creative license stories. And we do know that there are local sensitivity, but there's, even within a household, there's differing sensibilities. So that kind of variety of experience, variety of viewpoint, variety of sensibility is something we have to be mindful of all of our programming everywhere in the world, for anywhere in the world.
But are you mindful also of the politics of, sort of very, again, polarized views on the way to look at the world? Are those things that the platform is sensitive about?
To the extent that we can be. I mean, I think we find ourselves living in a time when everything is political. That's new. So I mean, basically, finding the underlying, political chasm in every storyline of every comedy produced is it's become part of the what we have to do now. So yeah, we have to be aware. We have to be aware, particularly as a global platform. You're much more likely to trip into areas of geopolitics that that's not part of the entertainment experience.
You've always been a great champion of diversity, and it was wonderful to see that I think this year, at least half of the original programming in India is going to be either produced by a woman or directed by a woman. Tell me, is inclusion a strategy or is it just something that's happening?
I think inclusion is great business. You basically want the people making the content to look like the people who are watching the content. I think the same is true for my executive team. That kind of diversity, we could be better attuned to our audience if we understand the life where they came from. We understand those same kind of sensibility issues that we talked about. And I think basically having a creative team and an executive team that looks like the audience they're serving is very, very important. And it has served us very, very well. I mean, some of our projects that people would point to and say, is that for diversity? No, it's for great television or it's for a great film. And the results have been phenomenal. And to your point about, those projects being led by women, it is the opportunity to open the platform to new storytelling and to new storytellers. That's been the most gratifying part for everybody at Netflix. And in many cases, that's underrepresented voices and faces on screen and behind cameras.
But is there a focused effort? Is there sort of a thing that like, okay, at least 20% has to be, either women or underrepresented communities? Do you have any sort of numbers that you're trying to hit?
No, I mean, our goal is that we're picking great shows, and there's no reason to believe that great shows can't come from women or men.
Of course.
And so I think it's getting rid of the preconceived notion of where great content comes from and just judging the content on the merits of the programming is the key. But we don't have any prescribed number that we have to hit or that people are trying to hit. They're actually just looking for the best programming. And when you get down to that decision point, you'll find that the creators are very diverse.
Tell me, in the last few years that Netflix has been in operation here, has anything about this market really surprised you? Has anything thrown you?
It's a very dynamic place. One of the things that I am most miss since this travel restrictions of COVID is my opportunities to come to India. It's one of the most fascinating, fast moving, dynamic places in the world. The energy on the ground is just, you can feel it in your bones when you walk down the street. One of the more my last experience, I believe you and I spoke at the Mumbai Film Festival a few years ago, right? And that experience of the way that Indian audiences embraced Roma, and the diversity and the breadth of programming and stories that Indian consumers get excited about has been the surprise. Because I think that most people from outside of India, believe that the storytelling is quite specific. That most people want to see Bollywood movies, or most people want to see this, or most people want to see that, and it's just as diverse and interesting as everywhere else in the world. So that's been nice to have that confirmed. And I just remember how gratifying showing up for that screening for Roma, and in Mumbai, and seeing lines around the block and 5 sold out screenings. It was a phenomenal gift for filmmakers, to be able to see their stories being embraced around the world that way.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I remember just the high of that gathering. Everybody was just like buzzing off a great film, which is just so lovely. It's just wonderful.
As a film lover myself, it was a great experience. I had, by the time that we were at those screenings, I had seen the film dozens of times, but I don't think I ever experienced it that way.
Yeah, that's the Indian audience, and which is why this also was fascinating to me. Your office shared with me a figure that in the last year, the Indian subscribers, more than 80% of them have seen a film every week on Netflix.
Yes.
So that's amazing, and which is apparently the highest around the globe of film.
It's
viewing,
the most watched, the most film viewing of any of our member bases around the world. And again, that's the thing. I think when people went into it, they know, around the world, everybody understands that that India has a great, rich, and robust film market, like a love for cinema. I think the emergence of something you and I talked about before, the cinemized television, is something that's still in its infancy. This idea of producing television at the same size and scope and scale of Indian film is something that we're, in the early beginnings of. And I think it's going to still be a way that we reshape storytelling around the world, and particularly in India. But you are correct. Indian audiences love films like nowhere else in the world.
Yeah. So, which is why, Ted, I have to ask, around, especially in Hollywood, you're making some of the finest films. The Oscar noms, all of it speaks to that. And I have to tell you about the most fantastic theatrical screening of The Irishman, again at the Mumbai Film Festival, where we had a single screen theater of 1,000 people, completely packed to the gills. It was incredible. And Ted, it felt like it was a big Bollywood movie, because every time one of the actors would come on screen, people would be screaming and whistling like they do for Hindi films.
Yeah.
It was just, it was amazing. And so the films you're making in Hollywood are just such exceptional quality, and they're so, and you said that the films coming out this fall are just an embarrassment of riches. I mean, I cannot wait to see Mank. I cannot wait to see so many of these films. Now, the quality of the Indian films that are being, made for Netflix is just very uneven. And some are strong, but others are really terrible. And I'm just wondering, why is that happening?
we've only been, we've been investing in original programming in India only for a few years, and we came into some at the beginning. There's a lot of trial and error, picking up projects that were in various states of production and completion. I think what you'll see is a constant improvement. Remember, we entered making movies in the U.S. for the world, and with a pretty spotty track record too. The creative process is iterative. And I do think that the time getting to know the market, getting to know the audiences, getting to know the creators has yielded us massive improvements all the way to where you're talking about, which is 17 Oscar nominations last year, and that I don't think we would have got anywhere near that on our first slate of original films from the U.S. And I think we've gone through those similar processes, and art's like that. I think we were pretty lucky out of the gate. With our original series with House of Cards and Orange is the New Black, and then with our original series in India, we similarly came out strong with Sacred Games, and I think as right now we're becoming much more ingrained in the creative culture in India, enabling us to work with increasingly strong storytellers and telling better stories.
Speaking of House of Cards, when Reed Hastings was asked how Netflix got Robin Wright and Kevin Spacey to sign on back in 2013, and he said it's Ted's charm and a hefty paycheck. Is that still the strategy for signing talent?
Well, it helps. I think in total, we've got an incredible team now of folks. You mentioned Bella, but also Scott Stuber, who runs our film group. They have deep talent relationships. They've worked in many cases, have worked with them for years and decades, really. So it requires a little less of my charm, but they still want to get paid a lot.
So you can take it a little easy right now.
I can take it a little easier, yeah. But look, it's I think the thing that's been most gratifying is that we've been able to do over the last 8 years of original series, have been able to maintain quality at a very high level, even while the volume of original programming is very big around the world. That the quality of that programming, film and series, and things like you mentioned earlier, India Matchmaker. But if you think about that, 2 years ago we had no original unscripted programming, and then now to where we're at today, making really meaningful unscripted series all over the world, and really making a difference in that industry.
It's wonderful to hear that you're sort of optimistic about the future of theaters, because really, like you said, it's impossible to imagine the world without them. At least for me, I remember the last time we talked, you were telling me how much you love the theaters. You had just gone to see Jurassic World with your son, and you were talking about what an experience that was. And I know that Netflix is, of course, not in the theater business, but you did rescue the Paris in Manhattan. You did take over the Egyptian in LA. And the situation is pretty in India. We have some lovely single screen theaters on the verge of closure because of the pandemic. Would Netflix consider looking at any of those?
It doesn't. We don't plan to expand the business dramatically in the theater on the theater side. I think that there are business models that continue to support that and the folks who run those theaters are way better at it than we are. The Paris and the Egyptian we use mostly to premiere our films and to be able to give some things runs where it's hard to get booked by other theaters. But I think that the theater owners will adjust to new normals. But it isn't our goal to expand our footprint in the theatrical space. We do support the industry. We try to book our films in theaters around the world for long runs. Remember, some people, they often say that Netflix only books the movies in the theater to qualify for the Oscar. But that's not true, obviously, because we don't need to book to qualify for the Oscar. We don't need to book outside of New York and LA. And we play our films all over the country and all over the world, and not for one day or 1 week, but in the case of Roma, that movie played in the theaters for almost a year.
Well, if you change your mind, there's some lovely Art Deco theaters in Mumbai.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it, because I think beyond the business approach to it, there's there is a thread of community that happens in both a community for the people who live in that community and for the entertainment community and for the creative community. That happens when people can come together, right? And I hope that there are business models that can support that as well. But there is a thread of community that gets lost if a city or a town or a community loses its theater.
Yeah, absolutely. So Alfonso Cuarón recently said in an interview that he's of course signed with Apple TV, and he said that filmmakers are saying that they will adapt to smaller screens, but he said, I don't believe in that. I think smaller screens should adapt to cinematic visions. Do you think that will happen?
What I've observed, the people who watch their movies mostly on smaller screens don't watch any different movies than the people who watch them on big screens. So I think that it's not that the screens have to adapt; audiences do. So I just think what people are watching, and it's probably an age thing, because I can't imagine watching a sweeping epic film on my phone, but my son watches almost all of his sweeping epic films on his phone. So maybe it's just an age thing, but like I said, the cinematic experience has not changed dramatically. Even though the composition of the screen has changed very dramatically. And I just think people adapt a lot more than we give them credit for.
So
the other
Ted,
one, you mentioned in India, by the way, that more people watch more movies, which is true. But the other thing is it's also our number one market for people watching offline, meaning that they're downloading
right.
and watching on devices, meaning they're watching on smaller screens. And you think about the cinematic beauty of Bollywood film. Both in the scope and scale of the film, and the beautiful colors and the wonderful music and all those things that you would attribute to a big theater in a big room. A lot of people are mostly experiencing that on smaller screens and headphones, which actually can be quite transformative and transporting of the audience. Where if you're so engulfed in the sound and the picture, the screen might be small, but it's closer to you.
Right.
You can fool yourself as to what room you're sitting in.
Yes. Tell me, does the co-CEO title bring with it a lot of changes for you? The last time we talked, you said you were sleeping 5 hours a night. Has anything changed on that front?
Well, no, as Reed had mentioned, when we talked about this, is that we've been running the company like this for the last several years. So we kind of felt like we've been co-CEOs for a long time, and this just makes it official, which is great. So my day-to-day hasn't changed much. People are disappointed to hear that there's not a lot of change, but we've been, Reed and I have had this 20-year working relationship where we have complementary and different skill sets, but we have a great mutual respect for one another, so that we can help complete each other's sentences sometimes, but openly challenge each other as well. So it's the co-CEO model is not one that has got a great history around the world of working well, but I think this one will, based on that 20-year history and working together and great mutual respect, and the things that we both know what we know and we know what we don't, and we have what we share is a real passion. You'd mentioned earlier about a cinephile. Reed goes to the Sundance Film Festival and sees 25 films. I go to the Sundance Film Festival and see 2 and have meetings all day. I'm very jealous of his indulgence for his passion for film. But he is a film lover extraordinaire.
And Ted, has the pandemic changed anything for the company in terms of budgets, the spends, the investments into content?
No, I mean, it's continued to grow. I had a conversation with Guillermo del Toro a few weeks ago, and he said that in this shutdown, that he's come to realize that there's only 3 things that you really need: food, water, and stories. And to me, it's like it was such a great encapsulation of this. So I just think our ability to continue to make great content for our members has been a lifesaver. And I just think where our investment continues to grow because people continue to value Netflix at a time when they're home, even more so. So we continue to do that. Our production's up. What's interesting is we're doing a lot more of the business like you and I are talking right now. And I do think that video calls to pitch projects or to do table reads with talent It's efficient. I just don't know yet what impact it's going to have on the creative process down the road. I think that the creation of movies and television is a business that largely happens in person. It's built on trust and relationships that are very hard to replicate with a video-only relationship. So I'm really excited for the opportunity to get people back together again for this collaborative, to celebrate this collaborative model that we all get to live in, and that has produced so much great work over the years. So I don't think that this is going to be the way we do things forever, thank goodness. And I really am looking forward to that time when we could do a table read in person, or a script note session in person, or a pitch meeting in person. I think the actors are going to have a hard time going back to traveling, because I think they quite like video for doing press and pitches. But I think that once they get a taste of it, they'll be excited to get back to work too.
Well, I hope the next time we meet, Ted, it is in person and it's not on video.
Me too. And I hope it's in India, and I hope it's soon.
Great. Thank you so much, Ted. It's always lovely to see you.
Always. Look forward to the next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.